Ladies and gentleframes, today I want to take you on a trip down memory lane, because in this Warframe guide, we're going to talk about the OG, the oldest and most iconic weapon in Warframe, the Braton. I mean, bro literally released even before 1.0, doesn't get much more OG than that. However, despite its old age, the Braton still absolutely slaps in 2025, so let me show you how to do this for yourself. As always, big lights to all our generous shoutouts who help me keep the channel members on, and now, let's jump right into it. Now, when we talk about the Braton, then the first thing to mention here is that this thing has variants. Starting out with, of course, the MK1 variant, which is the first primary weapon that any player will encounter after starting the game, because you can literally pick it as your starting weapon in the tutorial, or you go for the Paris bow, which, in case you did that, well, you probably made the right decision there. The MK1 Braton is really not all that good. However, after you're done with the tutorial, you can get the normal Braton, which also is pretty trashy. There is the Braton Prime, which is always available and never gets vaulted, therefore most likely the first prime weapon for many players out there, which looks very bling and cool but still isn't really good. And as if all of that is not enough, there's a fourth variant called the Braton Vandal, which you can get from the Elite Sanctuary Onslaught with a drop chance of, please make it stop. I mean, for real, if you want a Warframe status symbol, and you missed Excalibur Prime back in the day, then I think the Braton Vandal is actually a viable substitute. But now, let's talk about how the weapon works, and when it comes to that, it's really as basic as humanly possible. The Braton is the most generic type of weapon you will ever find in the video game because it is a hit scan, fully automatic assault rifle, doesn't get more standard than that. However, the Braton does have access to an Incarnon adapter, which is basically the reason we're making this video in the first place, because that is what makes this weapon viable in 2025 and, in general, much more interesting. As always, to get the Incarnon adapter, you have to unlock Steel Path and Deviri, then play the Deviri circuit in the week where the Braton Incarnon adapter is in the rotation, or if you're a rich space ninja, you can also go to the Zeraman 10-0, talk to Cavallero, smack some platinum on the table, and get the Incarnon adapter plus all the resources that you need for the Incarnon Evolution for 120 platinum. Just note that recently they did change the system a bit so that you only buy those weapons from Cavallero that are in the weekly rotation, and for all the other ones, you have to wait still. Now, once installed, in order to get into the Incarnon form, you do the same thing as with any other Incarnon weapon. You get headshots or headshot kills to fill up the Incarnon meter under your crosshairs. Once that's full, or whatever you consider full enough, you can go into Incarnon mode, which will change the behavior of the weapon quite a bit. First off, the fire rate will be reduced a bit, but therefore to compensate, you get explosive bullets that on impact have a 3-meter AoE in which they deal heat damage too, on top of additional crit chance, crit multiplier, and status chance buffs. Now, up next, I want to talk about the Incarnon Evolutions and go over which ones I think are the best. Before we do that, however, I do want to make a quick disclaimer because there are 4 different variants of the Braton: the normal, the MK1, the Vandal, and the Prime. The buff values that you gain from the Incarnon Evolutions are different on each and every one of those 4 variants. In case you just want to know all the numbers right off the bat, this right here is a screenshot giving you exactly this. However, going forward for the rest of the video, the Braton that we're going to talk about will be the Braton Prime, since it's my personal favorite variant to play with, and also I think the one that most of you out there will have. However, in case you're one of the lucky people who has the Vandal, then note that whatever I'm about to say, plus probably most of the builds too, do apply to the Vandal exactly in the same way, because the stats don't differ all too much between the Vandal and the Prime. I think both are pretty even when it comes to their power level, and your choice wouldn't make any difference as to which evolutions you would choose anyway. And as always, like the video or the drop rate for the Braton Vandal is going to be reduced by 1,000 times. Believe me, you do not want that. Cheers so much for your support. Okay, let's talk evolutions. As always, the first evolution just enables the Incarnon mode in the first place, so there's not much to say here, but once we take a look at the second evolution option, it becomes already very interesting, and there's a little bit of yapping that just has to happen now. In slot 2, we have 2 options which both at base increase our base damage by a tiny little bit. However, the main difference is the rest of the text. This one right here makes it that when you have a channel ability active, you will gain a whopping additional 38 base damage and 50% ammo efficiency on top. However, on the other side, we have nothing with channel abilities, but therefore, multi-shot consumes ammo directly from the ammo capacity. However, it therefore gives you 54% more damage. What that means is that the main bullet that you fire won't get additional damage. However, all the bullets that you fire through the multi-shot mechanic will have 54% additional damage, and even though the game doesn't say it here, this damage bonus is a special damage bonus. It is multiplicative to everything else and therefore much stronger than the value of 54% might initially suggest. However, this also has a bit of a problem, and that is the part where it consumes ammo directly from your capacity, meaning if you were to have, let's say, plus 300% multi-shot in total, that means every shot that you fire will consume 4 ammo. And with a maximum Incarnon ammo pool of 200, that means your magazine basically shrinks down to like 50 to 70 rounds on average. Which means this kinda sorta hurts quite a bit, but then again, if you're not having a frame with a channel ability, you kinda sorta have to pick it either way. And one last thing about the channel ability part here, because there is more nuance to that too. For this perk, not every channel ability in the game does actually count. Channel abilities for this perk only count if they actually drain your energy over time. If you have a channel ability like, let's say, Gloom, which only consumes energy when it actually affects enemies, and you're currently not having any enemies in the AoE, then also this thing here will not apply, so keep that one in mind. Up next, Evolution 3. This one becomes much more simple because it basically doesn't matter. What we have here is more base ammo capacity, only for the normal mode, not for the Incarnon, so we don't care. This one right here gives you on punch through hit 20% chance to restore ammo. Also here, it doesn't count for the Incarnon mode, so we don't care. And this one is the only one that actually does affect the Incarnon mode. And because there is a decent bit of recoil in the Incarnon form, I would actually just suggest going for Void's Guidance. More accuracy, less recoil. It's good, just go for that. And then in the final perk, this is usually where the big buffs come, and it isn't any different here. Either we can have a crit focused perk that gives us more crit chance, more crit damage, or we could go for a kind of sort of midway where we get a bit more crit chance but therefore also a bit more status chance. That's my personal favorite because it allows you to build a bit more all around for the Braton. And this one in the middle, this is actually kind of interesting. Shots fired with a critical chance lower than 50% increase base critical damage by 3x. This is a base crit damage multiplier, meaning if we were to select it, you can also see it right here, it goes from 2x to 5x and mods are applied afterwards. So you could get a crazy crit damage out of it. Only problem is you gotta keep your crit chance below 50%, otherwise it won't count. Now, in case you're running a very specific loadout that, for some reason, wants to avoid critical hits like the plague, then I think this right here would be a very nice synergy. However, I also can't really think of an example for such a build, which is why I would just recommend going with this one. Some more status chance is also very nice because it allows for status-focused builds, which are pretty strong, as we're gonna see in a minute. Now, with the Incarnon Evolutions out of the way, let's talk about the one thing that you probably clicked on this video for, and that would be the build section, the one thing that you've all been waiting for. In this video, I have a whopping 4 different builds prepared for you because I do have quite a nice Riven for the Braton, and I want to showcase the power of a Riven build at the end. Beforehand though, we're going to talk about a direct damage build that just tries to deal as much flat direct damage as possible. We will have a heat damage over time build, which is very appealing on a weapon that deals heat damage by default. And lastly, because of the very fact that we have heat on the weapon in the first place, we're also going to take a look at a blast build and see how that works. Let's first start out though with the direct damage one. This right here would be it, and it is as basic as it gets. We'll go with primary deadhead for as much base damage as possible, plus that nice headshot multiplier always coming in clutch. If you don't like headshots, you could also go with any other arcane here, something like primary merciless for example. Then the multi-shot is galvanized chamber, no explanation needed here I think. Critical Delay for the crit chance, Vital Sense for the crit damage, makes sense. Stormbringer and Malignant Force is our combined element. We go for Corrosive against Grineer. Plus, we also get Heat in the Incarnon form, so we have the ultimate armor strip. For other factions, of course, you would go with other elements. Then we go with Prime Bane of Grineer for that faction damage. I know a lot of you don't like it. If you don't like it, you could just drop in Serration or literally anything else. Maybe some Fire Rate, that is also pretty good on the Braton, especially if you go for Critical Delay here. And then finally, that's exactly what I did here. Prime Tread giving me Fire Rate and Punch Through, so I can hit multiple enemies at the same time. Now, this one right here, Galvanized Aptitude, is a bit interesting on the Braton, and we gotta talk about it in more detail. Of course, Galvanized Aptitude gives 80% status chance, but the reason most people use it is actually the substat, with the Gun Condition Overload mechanic giving you 40% direct damage per status type affecting the target, and with the Braton, this one is a bit special. This additional damage per status type only counts for the direct hit damage of the bullet on the one enemy that you hit, plus the AoE damage on that one enemy that you hit directly. However, other enemies that got hit by the AoE but not hit by the initial bullet will not get this additional damage, so it really only counts on the one target that you're actively shooting at. What does this mean for you? Well, for you this means you might want to go with Galvanized Aptitude if you want to play a single target focused headshotty playstyle like I'm doing here, or if you rather want to group up enemies and benefit from that 3-meter AoE that the bullets have on impact, well, then you probably want to replace this with something else. If you like the status chance portion of it, then you might as well go and drop in Hammer Shot, giving you the same status chance but therefore more crit damage. It's potentially viable, you can totally do that. That will be it for the direct hit damage. Let's now talk about the Heat DOT, where the first difference is, of course, that we're going to go for Primary Merciless up here because we're now dealing damage with the DOT and not with the headshot. Multi-shot is pretty obvious. A faction damage and Elementalist for a damage over time build is, of course, also the thing that you just need. Crit chance, crit damage, some more heat with even more status chance, Vile Acceleration to massively increase our fire rate, which I think is actually important for a status build since the base fire rate of the Incarnon form isn't all that high, and for a status build you want to have a relatively high fire rate, so that's a must in my opinion. And then also here, you could, if you wanted to, go for Galvanized Aptitude, giving you more damage on the very enemy that you're hitting, whichever one you prefer. Thirdly, here is the Blast build, which looks very similar. Only difference actually is that instead of the heat mod right here, we went for the cold mod so that the original heat that comes with the Incarnon Fire combines with this cold into Blast. Overall, a pretty nice build. However, I don't think that the Braton is necessarily the best blast build weapon, but if you have a grouping ability Warframe, then I think blobbing up a bunch of enemies and firing the blast shots into them is still a viable and very satisfying way to play. And finally, let's close the build section with a very nice trait, my Riven build. The Braton has a very nice Riven disposition, so the values you get out of Rivens are cool. What I have right here is not an S tier Riven, but it's still pretty nice. More critical damage, more status chance, a nice combination on the Braton Incarnon, and I combined it with all the galvanized mods, more multi-shot, even more crit, galvanized aptitude, faction damage. It's a direct damage build. It deals a whole lot of damage, and let me just show you quickly in the simulacrum how this thing slaps compared to a non-Riven direct damage build. As you can see, both builds are of course very strong, but the Riven build shreds enemies so hard that they sometimes just die in one hit. It's really crazy. If you like the Braton, I would recommend that you look out for a Riven for it. Usually they're not all too expensive because the Braton is not really a meta weapon, but with the right stats on it, you can definitely make this one of the hardest hitters in the rifle category. And if you want to know the only rifle you will ever need in Warframe 2025, then check out this video right here next. Another massive shout out to NeoSV, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostalix Gaming, Turtle Pier, Ondakaneo 2, Skylar Bowser, Mihawki, Phil the Meme, Socrates the Almighty Rat, Leo Murasaki, Shadow Lockhart, Troller Loxon, Han Tares, Patrisator, Boomia1, Mr. Games Place, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot!